Welcome back to another episode of Rapid Fire powered by SimpliFaster. I'm your host, Justin Ochoa, and I'm here with the head of performance at Liberty Christian High School, David Neill. David, how you doing, man?
Well, man, doing real well.
Thanks for jumping on here, man. Let's jump right into it. Starting off, I can relate to the fact that you're a family man, dad, husband, coach, entrepreneur. How are you managing and balancing all of these tasks? And what are some of the strategies that you've used to stay mentally healthy, physically healthy, and kind of manage all of those things?
Yeah, I had a pastor one time say that you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. And so like if you look at your budget, like you can have the nice house, you can have the nice car, you can have the nice vacation, but you probably can't have all three. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so when you look at the economy of time in your life, especially as a coach, which takes long hours and you're trying to be the best dad you can be and the best husband you can be, you have to really prioritize what am I going to be great at? And then what am I going to leave off so that I can be great at the things I want to be great at? So, when I look at my day, you got about 18 hours after sleep that you can use. I'm going to use 12 of that at work and I'm going to be the best I can be there. And then I'm going to get home and I'm going to be the best dad I can be, and at the end of the day, you're probably looking at 9:30 at night before you get a free moment to yourself. And, that's okay. You just have to accept that. And you know what? I'm not going to golf. I'm not going to have a lot of hobbies. I'm probably not going out with my buddies, and doing a lot of hunting trips with them and stuff like that because I've prioritized. I'm going to be a really good dad. I'm going to be a really good coach. I'm going to be a really good husband, and I'm going to make faith a priority in my life. And after that, there's not a lot left. I will say this, like one thing that's helped me a lot because you've got long days and when you finally do get an hour to yourself at the end of the day, you want to do something to really get away from all the other things. But what I found is it's really important that the way I use my little bit of free time is something that builds me instead of just waste time. And maybe that's just my personality. I hate wasting time in anything because it's so precious. But like I grew up a gamer, I was in the Halo days growing up and I spent way
Yeah.
too much time in high school, middle school on the Xbox and stuff. And you start getting kids and like when you got a young kid, this, like when a kid's in that 2 to 5 year old stage, 2 to 4 year old stage, I call it suicide watch because there's not a moment of the day you can step back and stop being a dad because they'll stick a fork in a light socket all of a sudden when you're not
Yeah.
looking. Like, even if you're not on the ground playing with a kid, like you're just watching this thing all day, right? So you get to bedtime, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night when they finally actually go to bed. You might put them down at 7:30, but really it's not over till 9.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I got to get up at 4 a.m. tomorrow. So I want to be in bed, getting ready for bed, sleep 10:30, so I got an hour, right? And so what would I do? I would pull up a video game or I would binge a show, Game of Thrones or something. And the problem is when I would do things like that, you know, you would always want more of it. It's kind of addictive in nature. And you would probably stay up a little bit later than you wanted to, not get the sleep you wanted to. And honestly, you get done with, NCAA came out this summer, right? And I put way too many hours into NCAA. And you get there and you win your dynasty season or whatever, and you just get done with it and you feel empty. You just wasted your time. And so what I found is when I use my free time at night with things that are valuable, whether that's reading, whether that's spending actual time with my wife. This is going to be so left field. I started picking up the piano last year. And so,
That's sick.
yeah, I'll spend my free time doing that instead of gaming or watching a show or something. And all of a sudden you feel refreshed instead of exhausted, and it's a lot easier to put it down when that time comes to go to bed, it's a lot easier to put that thing down than it is a controller or turn off. I just want to watch one more episode, right? Like that stuff just tears you up. And all of a sudden your free time becomes debilitating instead of refreshing and encouraging.
Yeah. No, I love that outlook, man. That's super beneficial to kind of approach it like that. Switching gears a little bit more to coaching. I know you were a high level athlete. You spent time at some high major schools as a coach as well. And now you're in the high school setting. So from a coaching perspective, what are some key differences between those levels as a coach that some coaches listening to this may be able to take away and trying to find, where they fit the best?
Yeah, so I was really, really blessed in my early career. I played football at Texas Tech for 5 years, and then they hired me full time as an assistant strength coach the summer after I got done playing. I went from there to Cincinnati for 3 years, and I spent 2 years at the University of Texas. All of that was football. Cincinnati, I coached some other sports in addition to football, but I got 5 years of being a college strength coach before I came to high school. I've been doing the high school deal ever since. So, I get this question from young coaches a lot is, should I go the high school route? Should I go the college route? What's the difference there? And I really boil it down to a couple of advantages and disadvantages. I don't think one's better than the other. There's things I miss about coaching college football. There's a lot of really
Mhm.
cool things about it. There's a lot of things that are frustrating at the high school level that aren't necessarily as frustrating at the college level. So what I would say about high school is, you know, the best part about high school is you have a way more impactful relationship with your athletes. College guys come in, it's transactional. They're looking to get their degree, they're looking to go on to the NFL. They're kind of established in who they are character wise and purpose wise. They're already developed. And so you get good relationships with them and it's fun, but there's a lot less getting to see the character and personal growth of a college athlete. Whereas high school guys, 15, 16 years old, you're figuring out what life is about. You're figuring out what your values are. You're figuring out what it means to be a man, and to have a role in that process for young people is incredible. I can't tell you the number of times that there'll be a guy in my program that I don't even think I have a great relationship with, and I'll get an email from their parents about how I've changed that kid's life, or how
Mhm.
I'm the most impactful person in their life. Or they'll come back years later and talk about how what we did and what we said prepared them for that next stage in life. And so there's a rewarding part of high school that I just don't think you can get as much at the collegiate level. I would also say that the work-life balance is much, much better in high school. The job security is much better in high school. You're not looking over your shoulder every year wondering if you're going to get fired because your quarterback got hurt and you lost 3 games you shouldn't have. You still spend a lot of hours at the office. I'd say I work 60, 70 hours a week, but in college that was probably 120. So it's a different level there. And then honestly, unless you're a really high level guy, meaning the head strength coach at a college or a high level assistant at a big time Power Five, the pay's better in high school too. I think in Texas, the minimum teacher salary is 60, and I know guys in college still making $30,000 a year, working
Right.
at a Power Five university. Luckily that's getting better, but when I remember being a college strength coach, and you make okay money at Texas, but it's not six figures or anything like that. And when you're looking every year at possibly getting fired, you know, you don't have the opportunity to put anything away, and you're really putting your family in a dangerous spot for the inevitable, which is you're going to get fired one day. It doesn't matter who you are, eventually it's going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean high school's perfect. There's some disadvantages, there's frustrations. You're always adapting to circumstances in high school. In college, you get your athletes for that 8 hours a week in the off season, and they're yours. You get to see them at mealtime so you can control how they're eating. You get to have a much greater influence on how they spend their free time. You really have control over their entire training schedule. Whereas in high school, you've got multi-sport athletes who are playing different sports. They've got private trainers they're working with, whether that is another strength coach, or usually it's going to be a skills coach. They've got outside voices in their life that are contradicting the things you're telling them, whether that's how they're training, whether that's how they're doing nutritionally. Mom and dad might be uninformed and not like what you're doing with them, so you're battling other voices. Different sport coaches within the school have different priorities and place a different value on the weight room. So, you're almost always doing things at a level under what you feel like you should be doing. You're almost always having to compromise parts of their training plan. We're in TAPS in Texas, which is the private school league. Our off season's limited to 5 hours, including locker room time. So in general, my athletes get 3 hours of training with me a week. In my opinion, that's about 30% of the time they should be training in a true off season. So, I'm having to leave a lot of their training either off the table or having to have them do it on their own at Lifetime Fitness or something. So, you know, we're so type A, strength coaches are so type A in our pursuit of perfect training. And you have to understand at the high school level, you're never going to get anywhere close to perfect training. So it's always compromised in some way, shape, or form. The advantages of college goes back to, you can be focused on one thing. In high school, I'm focused on 12 different sports. I have to deal with PD. I have to deal with coaching middle school athletes. I'm pulled in a lot of places. And when you're in a college setting, especially if you're football only, you get to take all your time and resources and put them on one thing. And there's something really rewarding about that. You'll be truly great at what you do. Whereas in high school, I'm always feeling like, man, I'm not giving football what they need because I'm having to deal with baseball and basketball, or I'm not giving the soccer team what they need because I'm having to go in this other direction. And it's just, I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing a good job, but there's definitely always a little bit out of reach just due to circumstances. There's so many things you can control in college that you can't in high school. And honestly, it's really cool, being at the University of Texas, wearing a Longhorn, going out in the field on game day. You know what I mean? Like, that's just,
Yeah.
there's something really cool about that. You work with really high level athletes. I would say the training differences are pretty vast too. The way I look at training is a spectrum. If you're looking at a middle school athlete is when they begin their training, and then an NFL professional athlete on the other end of that spectrum. As you train younger athletes, you're much more general in your training approach. I care far less about transfer to the field and more about building general movement patterns, general strength, just getting the basics down and laying foundation. So, and honestly, I say that foundation laying process is very rarely achieved even into high school. I have a few juniors and seniors who I feel like, okay, we've built adequate strength. I don't need to chase the strength goals anymore. And it's more about transfer of that strength into power and application to the field. You've got a few high level guys like that, but for the most part, it's like, man, I got this kid. He's too skinny, he's too weak, and he doesn't move well. And we got to keep addressing those things, pretty much through their high school career. Whereas we college athletes, you have certain goals you have in general for, like, let's say, you've got your lineman on the football team. Well, once my lineman can squat 550 to 600, bench press over 400, once they can clean mid 300s, chasing those strength gains is not nearly as important as tissue resilience, movement capabilities, transfer of that strength into power, and then that application of power in a way that helps them as at their position more. So there's a lot more high level, more intricate training you can do at that level that you just don't get to tap into because it's not appropriate for high school athletes.
Yeah, no doubt, man. No, that's a great answer. It kind of hit on my next question as well, and that is just some of your core principles of your program at the high school level. Sounds like you're big on building the foundation, going from general to specific. But if you have any core principles that coaches might be able to steal and implement into their own environment, what would you say those are?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned on high school training, like, you're never going to implement your plan like you want to. You're not going to have enough time in general, and then you've got spring break and fall break and Christmas break thrown in. You got tournaments thrown in. Kids are absent for different things. They're missing for a test or prom or pep rally. So, when you look at your training plan, it's really hard to be incredibly specific. You it's almost better to go general because you're just trying to get as much in as you can every week. And so when I look at training, my first priority is we have to work in consistent movement patterns that are going to help my athletes. For lifts, that's going to be squat, hinge, lower body pull, upper body push, upper body pull, and then having a strong core through rotation, anti-rotation, and just regular flexion core exercises like that. So we're going to hit those movement patterns every day. We're going to train those movement patterns consistently. We're going to focus on good strength through range of motion. So like every day, our first cycle of exercises is going to be less about building high levels of strength and more about, hey, can we train through the full range of motion and build strength at the end ranges? Can we develop these athletes just general ability to move through a full squat, through full hip rotation, through full shoulder rotation, those types of things. Then the next thing is you layer strength on that. Can they move well? Okay, now can they move well and be strong in those movement patterns? And I think those two goals handle 90% of your training at this level. On the speed and movement side of things, you're thinking through the same kind of lens So our movement patterns that I want kids to accomplish in speed, if you want to generalize speed as everything you do on a field, on a court, on a track, well, we want to make sure they understand acceleration patterns, and we want to strengthen acceleration patterns. We want to make sure they understand what it looks like to run at top speed, some max velocity patterns, and we want to strengthen those and enforce those. We want to make sure they have good deceleration patterns, the ability to decelerate, come to balance, transfer their speed into new directions. So if we're looking at our transitional patterns or our cut patterns, we're going to have a break plant separate, we're going to have a crossover step pattern, and we're going to have a foot fire pattern. It's Tony Villani stuff. It's really good. And then we're going to have a gallop pattern too. We got to get really good at galloping and learning to transfer force vertically through the gallop. I think if you handle those things on the field side of things and the things I mentioned on the strength side of things, you're going to cover 90% of your bases. When you get past that, if I'm looking at progressions, I like to do higher volume with younger athletes and go into more higher rep. Still, really, the volume's the same, but as we get into the high school ages, I like to do more sets, less reps. So you're hitting the same amount of volume in a workout, but more of that volume is higher loaded. So we're doing lots of 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, maybe more sets, 5, 6, 7 sets of that. And then what I'll do is I still think hypertrophy it needs to be an important piece of what we do. We'll AMRAP at the end of every high set, low volume day so they can get a set of 15, 20, 25 reps, get that pump. Because I think one thing we do is we look so scientifically at the way guys train, and hypertrophy kind of gets put off to the side. But for a undersized athlete in high school, which is what the majority of what we work with, hypertrophy is really important. If I can take a 130-pound basketball player and put 20 pounds of muscle on him, even if that muscle is, more bodybuilding type muscle, he's going to be a much better player just having more size and a better body composition, right? So we can't avoid a little bit of bodybuilding in our programs. It helps, and it helps them buy in too. You want to know the best way to get a high school kid bought into the weight room? Get his biceps bigger.
Yeah.
He's going to, all of a sudden, he's your guy. Your worth gold if he looks in the mirror and he's got bigger biceps. So it's a part of what we do too. And that kind of leads me into something else with our program that I think maybe we look at a little bit differently. I think the strength world of the last 15 years has transitioned into a very movement pattern-based lens through program design. We are looking at transfer of force. We're looking at shapes. We're looking at how athletes move. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And I think that's an important lens. But in the process, I think we have actually lost our tissue lens. We've lost our ability to look at the body through specific tissues and tissue adaptations. And so what happens is if I look at the way an athlete squats and only how he squats, but I ignore the patellar tendon, the VMO, and the quad and the development of those tissues, well, they don't have the structural framework to be the athlete they could be and take the movement patterns we're developing and strengthen those the way we want. So we also take kind of the back third of our workout and transition to more tissue pattern focus on our exercises. We're doing a lot of isometrics to the foot and ankle to strengthen ankle tissue, Achilles, the muscles and the tendons that connect the foot. Same thing with the knee and the patellar tendon and the VMO. The shoulder, we do lots of pails and rails and shoulder cars every day to strengthen the shoulder in ranges of motion that you wouldn't normally hit through your normal push and pull pattern. So I think training the neck and the strength of the neck by itself is incredibly important. I think if there's anything you can do as a coach that's going to help your kids long-term, it's protect them from concussions. If I'm looking at the lifetime of my athlete, there's 2 things I got to keep safe. I got to keep the lower back safe and the spine safe, and I got to keep the brain safe, because concussions and head injuries and spinal injuries in high school, they're going to live with that the rest of their lives. To make sure, number one, we're loading the spine appropriately, that we're getting good movement patterns in their posture when they squat, that we're adding in enough single leg work to deload the back when we're training, especially chasing high numbers. And we got to train the neck to protect against concussions. So when you're looking at tissue tolerance, I think that's really important. I think also on a conditioning side of things, when you look at conditioning for, like, let's say football, it's all energy system based and it's all, aerobic based, but there's a tissue part of that too. The hamstrings and calves are going to cramp if they're not used to high volume. It doesn't matter how aerobically they're in shape. And so I think there's a piece of it where we have to look at the work capacity of the athlete's tissue. Plyometrics is a great example too. If you're always low volume plyometrics in your program, well, sport by nature is high volume plyometrics. So if you never build up the work capacity of the tissue to handle higher volumes of plyometrics in the off season, when they get to season and the plyometric volume goes to the roof, you're going to have issues, right? So to look at tissue tolerance is part of what we do. And part of that's a bodybuilding lens and doing some stuff like I talked about earlier.
Yeah, no doubt, man. No, that's super, super helpful, man. I love everything you're talking about. If people want to continue this conversation with you or find out more about your program, or just connect with you, where can we find you on social media and where are you the most active at?
I'm most active on Twitter. My handle's Neill62, back from my college days. That's my number. I do Instagram too, and I'm on Facebook. I'll check those a couple of times a week, but I'm probably most active on Twitter.
Awesome, man. Well, this was great, man. It's awesome catching up with you and learning more about your program and what you guys do. Looking forward to putting this out.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Justin.